throat. Or is this the right thing to do?
We must never surrender. America will get better and better. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive.
Reverend said, say I am. I am. Somebody. I am.
Wake up! Blow your trumpet! Let the world know we are displeased. We do not like it.
Good morning and welcome back to the Justice Beat, where we explore the intersections of justice, psychology, and social systems and what they mean for real people. Today's episode will focus on a topic that sits at the very heart of the justice system, but it is often misunderstood, which is mental health. Mental illness shows up in courtrooms, jails, and police encounters every day, yet the systems designed to address it are often fragmented, under-resourced, or misaligned. And so, how does the justice system actually evaluate mental health? And what role do psychologists play in shaping these fair outcomes? To help us unpack these questions, we're joined by Dr. Alexandra Tsang, who's a forensic psychologist and the director and chief psychologist of the King County Diagnostic Center. Dr. Tsang works directly with the courts, attorneys, and law enforcement to conduct forensic evaluations, including competency to stand trial, criminal responsibility, and risk assessments. Her work sits at the critical intersection of clinical psychology and legal decision-making. And so in today's conversation, we'll be breaking down this topic into 4 parts, from Dr. Tsang's path into forensic psychology, to how mental health assessments help shape court outcomes, to the broader challenges and future of mental health in the justice system. Dr. Tsang, thank you so much for joining us on the Justice Beat. We're really excited to have you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I'm excited.
Yeah. So going into it, can you tell listeners a little bit about your journey into psychology and how you became specialized in forensic psychology?
Sure. Well, my path in to psychology in general started when I was actually really little. I come from an immigrant family. So I'm an immigrant child who, was raised in Chicago for, most of my life, or half of my life right now. And so I was always interested in social systems, social justice, and having had some experiences myself, I think it shaped my interest to enter the field and be of service to others. Now, for forensic psychology, I went to graduate school in the 1990s when forensic psychology kind of didn't exist. So I fell into it by accident in a way. I loved to do psychological evaluations. And when it was time to apply for internship, I discovered King County Diagnostic Center. And I said, wow, this, this is good. They work with a court system. You could help juveniles and adults. And I love the court psychology. So I applied. I got the internship 27 years ago, and I never left. I held every single position there. From intern, I became a staff psychologist, then director of training, and now I've been director for, 14 years or something like that. And I never left because I have such a passion for forensic psychology.
Wow, that's amazing. What does your role as director and chief psychologist at the Diagnostic Center involve kind of on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. So the Diagnostic Center is very unique, but I think a lot of people are paying attention to concepts like this. So who we are is we are the designated psychological department for the 16th Judicial Circuit. So we serve Kane County. So we exist solely for the court system. And we are very comprehensive. So whatever the court may need, most of the time it is psychological evaluations. So things like you mentioned, fitness to stand trial, was someone sane or insane at the time of the offense, violence risk assessment, sexual violence risk assessment, treatment recommendations, helping juveniles. That is the majority of what we do. But why we are unique, we also do mandated treatment. We are involved in mental health court. We are involved in drug court. Actually, King County has 4 specialized courts. There's also DUI and Veterans Court. So we are really an integral part of the system. We work, with probation and with the juvenile court system. So we are, of service to link mental health issues in defendants and to give opinions to the court as to disposition. Some people, yes, they should be in prison. Some people, no. It's really a treatment issue. If we're talking about wanting to make a safer society, we have to address the underlying mental health and substance use issues in those individuals that is, a pathway to how they got to the criminal justice system.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point there when you mentioned that certain individuals just happen to fall into the system because they do not get that support that they need, whether it's mental health or housing resources, and along those lines. So I think that's a really important point that you make, where there's sometimes a stigma associated with individuals that are in the criminal justice system and also happen to have symptoms of or get diagnosed with a mental illness.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you explain a little bit about kind of what competency to stand trial evaluations are and why they're so important?
So competency to stand trial evaluations, and we do probably over 100 a year, which gives you, and that's just Kane County, right? But what though that is, it's a very specific forensic evaluation, evaluating whether the defendant can take on the role of the defendant, meaning, do they understand the basic concepts of how a court proceedings go? Do they understand that there's a judge or, jury that will be making decisions for, their disposition? Are they able to participate with their attorneys and cooperate in preparing a defense? Meaning, can they logically and sequentially, tell their attorney what happened, at the time of arrest? And if there is a plea bargain or anything on the table, do they have the mental capacity, the cognitive capacity to weigh the options? What is better for me? And then also the third prong we always look at is, do they have the behavioral controls to withstand a trial? So if someone, for example, is in a active manic episode and cannot sit down, and they're yelling out impulsively and interrupting court proceedings, that becomes a problem. But the whole point of a competency evaluation is to make sure that defendants get a fair trial. Because if you don't understand why you're there, you don't understand, if you agree to a plea bargain and you don't understand the implications of that, what's going to happen for you, that's not a fair, proceedings. So what we do is we evaluate all that and we give an opinion if someone is competent or not. And then we also have to give an opinion. Could they be restored? Say they are not fit for trial. Can they be restored on an inpatient basis or outpatient basis? With the lowest threshold, always evaluating, can they be residing in the community and still undergoing fitness restoration? And then we have to give an opinion as, can they be restored within 1 year's time? And that's per Illinois statute. So we meet all those needs. There's a fitness hearing, and then, the trier of fact decides that.
Yeah. And I think you touched on this a little bit, but kind of how a mental health status can impact someone's ability to participate in their own defense. And
Right.
how do we kind of prevent from the court system or the criminal justice system from taking advantage of those individuals that might not be competent to stand trial at the time?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And a little bit about, you mentioned risk assessment for violence and sex offender evaluations. Can you speak a little bit about how they're used by the court system?
Yeah, great question. So, there's a police report, and background information accompanying every single defendant that's in front of the court system. But sometimes it's murky, whether it's a situational things or what is truly the risk level for this individual. And that's where we come in. We do a full psychological evaluation, measuring cognitive IQ abilities, personality factors, impulsivity. We use very structured risk assessments. Are they at risk to commit future acts of violence? Are there any mitigating factors? Are there any aggravating factors? So we do a full kind of workup and really establish a level for the court system. So for example, if your only aggressive acts are when you are high on heroin and meth, okay, we would come in and sort through that because the court doesn't have that background information. So we would say, okay, this is really substance induced impulsivity, lack of judgment. So if they deal with their substance use issue, the drivers for the criminal behavior are going to be dramatically reduced, right? So that's an example of a very narrow scope of when you would commit violence. However, there are people whether they're high, drunk, or not, love to commit violence. Now you're looking at a very different type of personality, individual. Are they personality disorders? Do they have antisocial personality? That's a different type of individual. So the court takes all that information, they get the full report, we make recommendations, and then the court can, they have an option, which typically they do, is they mandate that defendant to complete all the recommendations. So, and that could be go to substance use, go to anger management. You need to psychiatry because we think medications could help you. So that becomes kind of a court ordered, which is great for two reasons. Sometimes people lack awareness that they need help, and this is an issue for them, right? But the other kind of nice thing about Kane County is we have the resources to help the people with. Like if they come to therapy for Kane County Diagnostic Center, they don't pay for that because we're embedded in the court system. We are not private practice. We don't deal with insurance. It's all conducted by staff psychologists. So people are getting treatment that otherwise in the community would not have the resources to get treatment in terms of, money or insurance or something, especially when you're dealing, with someone like the homeless population. They don't even have bus money to get to us, much less if we're going to recommend therapy, right? So it's a great system really designed for the underserved population.
Yeah. And I do want to highlight what you touched on also about sometimes incarceration might not be the answer. And sometimes, again, we need to provide this individual with resources, whether that's
Yes,
medications or therapy through your center that's court ordered, so that they don't need to be necessarily incarcerated and we can get them that
correct.
help and connect them to resources, like you said, that they might not have in their communities.
Yes.
And I think that's really great about Kane County and your system. So that's really great to hear. Um, and I kind of want to transition to a more fun, lighthearted question. When people hear about forensic psychology, they often think of like TV crime
Yes.
dramas. What are some common misconceptions about your work?
Yes, they're certainly out there. So yeah, this is a great question. So I think when I get asked and I tell people I'm a forensic psychologist, they have this image of me, running through crime scenes in high heels and dressed to the nines like you would see on TV. And it's not that at all. I think people confuse forensic science with forensic psychology. The crime scene people, that's forensic science. You're gathering information, whether it's, physical, DNA, everything like that, right, in close proximity to the crime. Forensic psychologist is really the application of psychological uh, concepts and evaluations, therapy, intervention, to the criminal justice system. So it's way different. So I always tell people, well, crime scene analysts, forensic science, they deal with the dead bodies. We deal with the live people. So it's a lot more dynamic. It's a lot more complex. Trying to evaluate someone's mind and explaining to the court why they committed the crime they did. But I think that's the number one myth, that people merge the two, and it's not one and the same.
Right. I think of like Criminal Minds,
Exactly.
where
That's
they're
not
like
us.
in the
Sorry.
field analyzing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
So that is an important distinction.
Yes.
um, I do also want to discuss some broader systemic issues and solutions at the intersection of mental health and justice, and kind of get your opinion on some of these concepts. Like, what are some of the biggest challenges that the justice system faces when handling individuals with complex mental health needs?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest challenges is the justice system was never designed to handle such mental health complexity, right? That's really a clinical issue. Just like jails have not been designed to be mental health centers. But lo and behold, here we are. We are at this convergence of mental health and criminal justice. So and because it was not designed to kind of have that lens to see mental health clinically, it's often, some of the kind of side effects of that is, say someone is incarcerated, right? You're in jail, but you are symptomatic, so you are paranoid, so you don't have the eye contact, or you are experiencing auditory hallucinations. So if someone is speaking with you, you're not listening because you're listening to the voices. That could easily be misconstrued as, disobedience to authority, or, you're isolating, you're not doing what you need to do. So it's early on when this was happening, I think The justice system was viewing this more as a disciplinary issue or non-compliance or whatever, as opposed to looking at not that these individuals are not choosing volitionally to disregard, what you're saying. It's not that they won't do that. It's just they can't. And that's a big distinction, right? But I think we are making huge progress in terms of recognizing that we have a large majority, of a Cook County jail, for example, one of the biggest psychiatric institutions in the United States, and it's a jail, right? I mean, so I think that's the two have never been designed to coexist, but now we are, and I think we're making progress in terms of the synergy. How do we kind of join forces and for the betterment of the people?
Yeah, that fact that you mentioned that Cook County Jail is now one of the biggest mental health providers in the country, I think just speaks to the severity of the situation and how
Yeah.
much the two fields have merged, mental health and the CJC system over the
Yes.
years. And that important distinction where, these individuals are suffering from sometimes severe mental illness
Yes.
that is impacting how they view the world, and their worldview. And so to just simply charge them with a crime is not going to connect them to the resources that they need to get better,
Right.
and individualized treatment for them. So I think that's a really important point that you make. And I do know that a lot of these individuals also are apprehensive when coming forward with or just interacting with law enforcement. And I know that you provide training to law enforcement at
Yes.
times on these very important topics. And so I was wondering if you can speak to kind of what kind of training you provide and how that is so crucial to this topic.
Yes. So law enforcement has, responded to this issue of, initially not being equipped to deal with the mentally ill, and they're the first responders, right? But I think we've really progressed in this area. So you mentioned my training. Yes, a lot of police departments now have what are called CIT, crisis intervention teams. Now, those are specially trained officers that go on calls where they think it's more of a mental health issue rather than, a legal, law breaking issue. So, for example, a homeless man does not want to leave the library when it's 8 p.m. And the library is, trying to close. Is that criminal trespassing? Sure, it can be, but now how law enforcement is responding is to go on scene with these specially trained officers, and asking and finding out they're homeless. It's warm there. They don't want to leave. So taking them to a shelter or taking them, to emergency room if they're really actively psychotic or something, getting them mental health treatment as opposed to charging with a crime and, now they're in the criminal justice system. But these officers really have to go undergo a 40-hour training. So one full week where they are taken away from their police duties, right? And learning about everything on mental health. I usually, when I do these trainings, I have a full day that I do. I'm usually the first day. And I give an overview of all the mental health disorders. How do you respond to someone who's hallucinating? Because again, police officers, they're not psychologists. They've never had the training. So the question is, do I nod and say, yeah, I see, Mother Mary. I see, like, if you're hallucinating, having religious, so I teach them, how to respond adequately to that. What do you do if someone's having a panic attack? How do you talk to someone who's maybe manic? So I take, the situations that they will be in, but I help them apply psychological knowledge so they're better equipped to deal with the mentally ill. So it's a great system. The other thing police departments are also doing, a lot of them now have co-responding models. So as they are, driving around or on scene, they actually have social workers or master's level clinicians who are, trained to talk to mentally ill, go with them and just kind of do some de-escalation. Not everything has to rise to the threshold of an arrest, right? Now the law is being broken. Yeah, they have a duty, whether you're mentally ill or not. But sometimes there's a murky, situation, just like that homeless person in the library. You're trying to encourage them so you don't have to arrest them. So that's where you kind of use psychological principles of, motivational interviewing, giving them the resources, maybe they're hungry, maybe they're cold, so it's a growing model everywhere. And I think we are definitely headed in the right direction with that.
Yeah, and that's super important. Kind of tying it back to what we talked about earlier, how these individuals sometimes end up in the criminal justice system because, for example, they were trespassing and were committed with that crime, but they just wanted a place to stay for the night.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that training that you provide with law enforcement officers is kind of teaching them to approach the situation in a humane way.
Yes.
And seeing the person as a human first, and kind of, like you said, connecting them to those resources. Like, are they hungry? Do they need water? Do they need a place to stay? Maybe just a blanket makes a difference.
Absolutely. Yes.
In literally just keeping them out of, the
system, which,
right.
because I in that example, if, let's play it out, you got arrested, you can't afford an attorney, for example, but now you have to use a public defender. But for such a minor, we have such big issues in society, bigger crimes to worry about than a homeless person maybe, stealing a candy bar or something, or just refusing to leave a warm place. It's the allocation of resources too, right? There's limited resources. But again, just recognizing the barriers some people have, especially if you are an underserved population. There's a lot of barriers for you. And if you address those barriers, a lot of times it doesn't have to, lead that person to now be involved in the justice system.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, important points that you make there, where our system is already overburdened
Yes.
as is, and kind of looking at ways to not only just incarcerate all the time, but making sure that we are, allocating services and resources to these individuals, and making sure that they do receive the services that they need.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think we're going to go into a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we will be discussing some real world impacts and some listener takeaways.
Okay.
Thank you.
Introducing Next Generation Media Internship Program, designed for undergraduates, postgraduates, unemployed, dislocated workers, and WIOA participants. Our program offers remote virtual work experiences, qualifying as approved individualized career services. Learn while leading at your own pace, with part-time or full-time hours per week. Benefit from weekly debriefings and group supervision, along with our 15-minute masterclasses. Our projects include the Justice Beat Talk Show and the Just Us Youth Talk Show. Discover your gateway to success today.
Okay, welcome back. Kind of just transitioning into talking about, for listeners who want to better understand or support people, right, with mental health challenges involved in the justice system, what are some key things that they should know?
How to help, or?
Yeah, just to better understand or support them.
So people involved in the justice system, I think one understanding is I would, you know, we have to understand the pathways to crime. There's different pathways to crime. Certainly, there are those individuals that, show very early childhood conduct disorder. They may grow up to be antisocial personality, which is a different kind of offender than the underserved trauma. Trauma is a huge factor and huge open door to committing crime. We have to look at social systems and the biopsychosocial factors in the individual. There are, if viewers want to get involved, there are great lot of organizations out there like NAMI. NAMI has factions all over Kendall County, Kane County, the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill. I think they're a great agency. It's designed especially for families of people who have a family member who's mentally ill, and they offer legal services, support services, the understanding. But I think if, we're looking at violence, especially, and crime, we are such a reactive system by design. The criminal justice system is reactive, right? Somebody has to commit a crime to get involved, right? Then we react. But I think where a lot of us in the community, also the professional fields, we really have to go backwards and look at prevention. Look at our communities, chaotic families. If you look at the ACEs study, adverse childhood experiences, right? If one of the parents is incarcerated or substance using, what does that do to the family system? Poverty, lack of resources, being, unemployed or underemployed, not having degrees. Those are all factors that may not set you up with how our society is designed, right? You're already kind of, over here when you should be over here. So I would say, prevention is huge. Having that awareness that there are, numerous pathways to crime. We certainly have, the most violent offenders, which are, psychopathics among us. Certainly they exist. But not everyone who commits a crime is a bad person. And once the person has that label, it's very hard to go backwards, because committing crimes is sometimes one symptom of a whole framework of the person, where they come from, do they have mental health issues? Do they have substance use issues? Do they have anger problems? Are they not connected with anything post-social? Are they isolated? Do they have mental health symptoms but don't have access to care and are unmedicated? And on top of it, they commit crimes. So we tend to kind of see the crimes and define the person and judge them by that moment in time, when if you kind of zoom out, you see this whole package of, a cluster of things that led them to that moment. So
Yeah, absolutely. Just looking at the person holistically.
yeah.
And like you said, in psychology, we call it the biopsychosocial model.
Yes. Yeah.
But for our listeners, just looking at the person holistically and maybe looking at factors that are contributing to their distress. And
Exactly.
like you said, individuals commit crimes for a variety of reasons. It's not just because they are automatically labeled as psychopathic or sociopaths and those like serial killers that we see, like the Ted Bundys of the past. So there are a lot of factors that go into
Exactly.
an individual's decisions, and their background is a big one.
And when mental illness is present, and by the way, mental illness alone is a very weak predictor of violence. It really is. Most mentally ill people do not commit aggressive acts. If anything, they're more of a danger to themselves or at risk for being victimized. But I think what kind of the myth out there that society has is that mental illness equals dangerousness. And again, alone, it's a very weak predictor for violence. What are more robust predictors are like those early childhood, aggressive acts, animal cruelty, lack of empathy, not able to follow directives and, disregarding social norms, substance use, having impulsivity problems, access to weapons. All those are much stronger predictors of violence than mental illness alone. Certainly if you are within the mental illness framework, though, if you are experiencing command hallucinations for aggressive, yes, within that, that does heighten your risk, or being in a very acutely, manic episode, or, paranoia and persecutory delusions. Within the mental illness group, those elevate your risk, but just because you have a mental health diagnosis does not automatically mean you're dangerous. And I think society and the news and everything perpetuates that myth. They're equating the two, and they are not the same.
Right. And I was going to touch on that with you. This myth that individuals that are mentally ill are more susceptible to committing crimes or
Yes.
being violent. But in fact, like you said, it's the complete opposite. They're actually more likely to be victims.
Absolutely.
So
they're
I
more
think,
likely to be victimized. Yeah.
right. Exactly. And I think that's important for the public as well. And I did want to ask, kind of, how do you think that these high-profile violent cases that we see, either from the past or today's kind of news, involving mental illness, how do they shape public perception so strongly? And, like, how does that work?
Yeah, so you get this splashy title, right? In newspaper, social media, whatever. And the brain is really designed to latch on to anything that's vivid, graphic, right? It's a survival thing. Like, we want to know, but there's a lot of inaccuracy in that. It shapes, it instills fear in society. If you're reading something that says schizophrenic man, committed this murder or whatever. Those are outliers. They're exceptions. The more accurate truth, which would be very boring, would be tens of thousands of mentally ill people are living peacefully and taking their medication. That's not going to make the headlines, but that's more accurate, right?
Right.
But I think it instills fear in us, these like mass violence or anything like that. Of course, it makes us all vulnerable. And we all want an explanation. We want an easy explanation. If we could point a finger and say, well, it's just mental illness, we feel like, okay, we got this understanding. And most of the time, these cases are so complex. There's a lot of background when you kind of do a psychological autopsy on some of these crimes and you go backwards. There have been a lot of years of, things in the making to kind of create this perfect storm. So, when you get these splashy headlines, it just perpetuates the myth that mentally ill people are dangerous and, all the crimes are their fault. And so it does us no good, because then we're not looking at the actual drivers for violent behavior. We're going to miss it. We're over predicting violence in the mentally ill. And that's dangerous, because then they may not get things like diversion in the criminal justice system, or having someone say, well, they need resources rather than incarceration. So I'm not a fan of the splashy headlines, because oftentimes they don't tell the whole story,
Right.
So, yeah,
And sometimes these, news outlets are specifically looking for a reaction from the public.
exactly.
And like you said, I think that like aspect of, oh, this is something that's dangerous and we need to be on the lookout for it,
Yes,
is what they use to kind of compel that audience.
exactly. And
Yeah.
it's a distraction from kind of the real core of issues, which again, I've mentioned the communities and just the biopsychosocial, pieces. Aggression, violence are very complex issues, and it's usually not one thing causing that. It's a multitude of circumstances. It's the person, but that person within a certain type of situation, that elevates your risk.
Right. Absolutely. And I know that we kind of touched on this as well, but what factors might be more predictive of criminal behavior other than mental illness?
Yeah, so I mean, there's multiple things that are more predictive. Again, that early conduct disorder, early aggression is a very robust factors. If you have a 5-year-old who's starting to torture the dog and animal cruelty and then, hitting sister or something, that early childhood um, aggression is definitely a red flag for immediate intervention. But then you have things like substance use. Substances are very disinhibitory. So whatever you're feeling, say you are feeling angry in the moment, right? If you are under the influence of any of the substances, actually, it just kind of lifts your internal brakes. You are more likely to act out on any emotion you're feeling under the influence of substances than, if you weren't using substances. Trauma. Trauma is a big, and I'm not saying at all that traumatized people will um, grow up to be in the justice system. What trauma reflects, though, is potentially the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, the experience the person, has had growing up. Maybe they were abused. Maybe physical violence was seen as an appropriate problem-solving strategy. So you were hit all the time. You had lack of resources, we're back to the community and everything. So these are not good experiences for a person to have. It does shape your brain. It shapes the way you view the world. It shapes the way you interact with the world. It shapes your judgment. There's a lot of negative emotions that may come from, being, grown up in an environment like that. And then on top of it, you might have mental health issues. But there's certainly so many other factors that when they converge together, really, increases the likelihood of being involved in the justice system.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. I think that, like we were talking about before, the only kind of predictor of violence and crime that individuals can think of is mental illness, but we know that that's
Right,
not a accurate predictor
right.
of that. Um, so thank you for kind of discussing the broader systemic challenges associated with the two systems. I want to transition into our Q&A segment with Camila, our associate producer, who will be asking some questions from the audience members.
Great.
Hello, my name's Camilla. I'm another intern here at Next Generation Media. I'll be helping with the Q&A portion of today's episode, or what we call maximizing the moment. To start, though, I want to thank Dr. Tang for coming on today's show and speaking on the topic of mental health and the justice system. So the first question that we have from our viewers is, when appropriate, please speak to the challenges of accountability and compassion when engaging with the criminal justice system.
So accountability, of course, is huge. You are not going to change behavior if the person doesn't think they did anything wrong. So accountability has to be there. And in order to have remorse for something, right, you have to be held accountable. So I think that's always in there, whether you're mentally ill or not. That is absolutely an essential piece to, reduce any future potential acts, of crime, right? We don't want you, this is one, criminal justice system is one kind of system where you don't want repeat customers, right? We don't want the thing. So, and I'm sorry, the other piece was empathy or
Compassion.
compassion. Yeah, the compassion I think is also huge. If we are going to try to change people and change symptoms, we cannot just simply judge them and say, well, they're bad, so forget it. If you have that mindset, you are not going to invest in the person, and we need to be invested in human beings. We do. And if you easily write someone off as, well, they're just bad, you think you're going to want to invest resources and help that could help this person. No. So that's a very dangerous mindset. You have to have compassion. Compassion is not condoning the crime, and I think that's another kind of confusing point for people. I could be compassionate for where you came from, that all those circumstances, the life you've led, what happened to you, not what you did, what happened to you to get you here. That does not mean I condone or agree with what you did, but I see the path, and I believe, as a psychologist, I always believe that people can change, right? So here are some things I see that could help you, so you don't have to come back to the criminal justice system again. So that's an excellent accountability and compassion. I like that question. You need both.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The next question that we have is, do inmates receive any sort of mental services for free in federal and state prisons?
So the federal and state prison systems, I'm not as familiar as with the county system. I know Kane
Okay.
County, I'll speak to that first. I know
Mhm.
there are some state prisons that, for example, if you are found guilty but mentally ill, you get
Mhm.
sent to certain prisons only because they do have psychiatric care and some groups and mental health services available. I know in Kane County, they have mental health clinicians on staff. Everyone gets an intake. They do run groups. They actually have a residential substance use treatment program housed within the jail. So when you leave the jail, hopefully you're detoxed and had some substance use treatment. But that really varies by county, by jail, who the elected official is, right? Who the sheriff is. Um, but in a broad sense of the word, yes, there are differences in, Department of Corrections, and some are geared and more designed to handle the mentally ill.
Thank you. And then kind of building off of that, I think, what are the factors that then make these services a priority for King County?
The jail or just
I think the jail to specify.
yeah, I think why it's a priority for Kane County, for
Yeah.
someone like me, for the jail, for whatever, it's because we have come a long way from seeing individuals in the criminal justice system viewing them as criminals. That's oversimplification, and it's not accurate.
Mhm.
We are very trauma informed.
Okay.
Justice systems have to be trauma informed and very sensitive to mental health needs if we are going to help people in recovery and change symptoms. For example, reentry programs. If
Mhm.
someone does need psychiatric services, or maybe is homeless, or, what do you think is going to happen when they leave jail and they go back to being homeless and unmedicated and substance using, whatever their issue is? The
Mhm.
linkage between court and the community is huge. We want to help people succeed. So there's such value in these type of programs for the greater good of society. If we give people resources and really kind of, take away some of these barriers, we are all going to be safer and happier as a society.
Thank you. That's very important. And then I think this will be our last question. What is the biggest takeaway from working in this position and the field for over 10 years?
The biggest takeaway. Um, the biggest takeaway is, the next generation, especially of psychology students, or I think, is to really, I like where things are going in terms, we still have a long, long way to go. Um, but, looking back to where I started in forensic psychology, how the systems were, what our understanding was, it truly has evolved, and we are
Mhm.
continuing to evolve and supporting things like specialty courts. So instead of, sending people to prison, make them go to treatment, wonderful models. So I think as a society, use the power of vote, vote for these programs, vote for, elected officials who support these programs, be trauma informed. We need more people in the field in forensic psychology. So I think the next generation has a much better understanding of trauma informed now than we did like 20 years ago, right? Because they're teaching
Mhm.
it and everything. So I think it's just, get involved in whatever capacity you want. There's a lot of work to be done out there, but there's also a lot of good work that has already been done that brought us to, where we are now.
Thank you. That's very important, especially like you mentioned, for up and coming psychology students
Yes,
to just continue to stay informed and continue building on the system that's
exactly.
already in place.
One day in the future, I do want to retire, so I have to. So someone, somebody has to take on this work. I'm not retiring anytime soon, but the work needs to continue.
Mhm.
So
Thank you. So that's the end of our Q&A session today. I'm going to give it back to Donica for the closing. Thank you.
Thank you, Camilla. And I just wanted to as we wrap up today's episode, one thing is clear. Mental health and the justice system are so deeply connected, whether the system is prepared for it or not. Dr. Tsang's work reminds us that forensic psychology isn't just about labels or punishment, it's about understanding accountability and ensuring that legal decisions are informed by accurate psychological insight. And these evaluations influence everything from whether somebody can stand trial to how risk is managed and to how communities actually respond more humanely to individuals in crisis. Dr. Tsang, thank you so much again for sharing your expertise and for the work you do every day at the intersection of mental health and justice. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to the Justice Beat talk show. If today's episode sparked any questions or reflection, we encourage you to keep learning, stay curious, and think critically about how justice systems can better serve individuals with mental health needs. Be sure to follow us for future episodes, and we'll see you next time on the Justice Beat.
thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Tsang.
Take your time.
What's wrong? What is the right thing to do?
We must never surrender. America will get better and better. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive.
Reverend said, say I am. I am. Somebody. I am.
Wake up! Blow your trumpet! Let the world know we are displeased. We do not like